60,000 years ago, if you had walked across Eurasia, you would have met people who were not your species, not people who looked different, people who were a different kind of human. Neanderthals across Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans somewhere across the east. On the island of Flores, a species barely a meter tall. On Luzon in the Philippines, another small one we only described in 2019. At least 5 kinds of human, all alive at the same time, on the same planet. Today there is one. And nobody really talks about how strange that is. So what actually happened when we met? The first answer is the one that reorganized the whole field, and it only arrived in 2010, when a team led by Svante P managed to sequence a Neanderthal genome from fragments of ancient bone. The result was not what most people expected. If your ancestry is from outside Africa, you are carrying somewhere around 1.5 to 2% Neanderthal DNA right now. It is in your genome. You inherited it. That is not a metaphor. Somewhere between 50 and 60,000 years ago, after modern humans moved out of Africa, our ancestors and Neanderthals had children together, and those children had children. And the line runs unbroken to you. Then it got better because there was a second population nobody had predicted. In a cave in Siberia called Denisova, researchers found a single finger bone. It was too small to identify by looking at it. But the DNA inside came back as a population that was neither Neanderthal nor modern human. An entire human species, discovered essentially from a fingertip. And people alive today carry their DNA too. In Papua New Guinea, and among Aboriginal Australians, Denisovan ancestry runs to around 4 or 5%, which is considerably more than anyone carries of Neanderthal. Now the single most remarkable fossil I know of. In the same Siberian cave, from a fragment of bone, researchers sequenced an individual known as Denisova 11. She was a girl who died at around 13 years old. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. Not a distant mix from thousands of years back. A first-generation child of 2 different human species, found in the one cave we know both of them used. Think about what that implies about how common this was. We have sequenced a tiny handful of ancient individuals from that period. Finding a direct hybrid in that tiny sample suggests it was not a rare accident. It was normal. So the first answer to what happened when we met is unromantic and completely clear. We had children. And that DNA is not sitting there doing nothing. It is running in your body today. Neanderthal variants affect immune response, blood clotting, skin and hair, and how we handle certain infections. A study published in 2020 found a stretch of chromosome 3 inherited from Neanderthals that is associated with more severe outcomes from COVID-19, and a separate Neanderthal-derived region that appears protective. 50,000-year-old genetics showing up in a modern pandemic. The clearest case of all is in Tibet. Living at very high altitude requires an unusual version of a gene called EPAS1, which stops the body overproducing red blood cells in thin air. Tibetans have it. It came from Denisovans. People are living on the Tibetan plateau today using a genetic adaptation borrowed from a species that no longer exists. Now the harder question. If we were interbreeding, why is there only one of us left? The popular answer is that we killed them. And here I have to be careful because that story is much less supported than people assume. There is no site anywhere showing a massacre of one human species by another. No mass grave of Neanderthals with modern human weapons in them. The archaeological evidence for organized violence between species is essentially absent. That does not prove it never happened, but it means the extermination story is an assumption, not a finding. What the evidence does show is a demographic problem. Neanderthal genomes show low genetic diversity and signs of small, scattered populations. Some individuals show high levels of inbreeding. They had been living in a harsh Europe for hundreds of thousands of years in small bands, always thinly spread. Modern humans arrived in larger numbers and kept arriving. You do not need violence for that to end one way. If 2 populations are interbreeding and one is 10 times larger, the smaller one does not get wiped out. It gets absorbed. Its distinctive features dilute generation by generation until there is nothing left that looks separate even though the genes are still circulating. Add slightly higher mortality, or slightly lower birth rates, or a run of bad climate, and the models close the gap without anybody being killed at all. The last clear Neanderthal traces date to somewhere around 40,000 years ago. There is no dramatic final scene. They thin out, region by region, and then the sites stop. And there is one more possibility that I find genuinely moving. Some of them may not have died out at all in the way we mean. Some of them may simply have joined, because that is what the DNA is telling us. Every non-African alive today is walking around with fragments of a vanished species stitched into their chromosomes. Collectively, humanity still carries a substantial share of the entire Neanderthal genome, distributed in pieces across billions of people. So what happened when we met another human species? We talked to them, almost certainly. We traded, probably. We competed, definitely. We had children with them, unquestionably, and often enough that we can find a first-generation hybrid in a sample of a few dozen bones. And then, over thousands of years, they stopped being a separate people and became part of ours. We did not meet the last other humans and defeat them. We met them and absorbed them and forgot.